Okay, so neither of you were in my tikva class, so if Sean comes, he'll catch up on it. Avi was there, but Sean, we're doing chazara from the tikva class, right? Because it's this week's parsha, right? But chazara is good. Right, so the question that we started our class with had been, fundamentally, does the Torah have something unique to say about economics? Right, that was our opening question. Right, we dealt with other questions, we did specifics, but this was our first question, and the test case was Yovel. Right, the reason it was Yovel was because one of the huge machlokot amongst the early Zionists, when they were trying to construct an ideal society, was, does Jewish tradition have anything to say about the big questions that are necessary to shape society, which include politics, which include economics, right? And therefore they wanted to know, does halacha have something unique to say? So they all basically ended up turning towards Yovel, because Yovel is clearly in many ways the most systematic of and the most far-reaching of our economic systems. I mean, the Shemitah Yovel cycle, but also the return of land, right? The inability to own things forever, right? This seems to have something very profound to say about economics. But the question is, does it, and what exactly does it say? So Sean will help me as we go through, right? But basically, there was the school of thought followed by Herzl, who basically looked at it and said, aha, you learned from Yovel that we believe in socialism, because you see that we don't really believe in private ownership. And therefore, his vision, which he wrote in Antonland, which means in our land, I believe, or our old, I forget, whatever it means. What his suggestion was, if we want to model the Israeli economy on Yovel, so there's an easy way to do that. And that is that we make it that all the land is owned by the government. Right? And that's what he learned from the laws of Yovel. Now, this was obviously very problematic for several reasons. Right, Sean, tell me why it was problematic.
Well, one, there's actual land assigned to people and it's being restricted.
Good. First of all, Yovel does not prevent ownership. It returns things back to the original owner, right? Or very nicely, as Jabotinsky in his not direct critique, but obviously critique, points out, is that Herzl identified Yovel with socialism, except socialism at its core is prophylactic, right? Adam's staring at me. What do I mean it's prophylactic? Meaning, socialism believes that inequality is a problem, and the best way to solve it is to make sure that equality never happens, right? It's prophylactic, right? It's like taking a vaccine against inequality. But Yovel, by no stretch of the imagination, is like that, right? That would mean that no one's allowed to own land, or everyone always owns the same amount of land. Not that you're allowed to buy and sell and buy and sell, buy and sell for as much as you want for the course of 50 years, which you have to remember, for much of human history, 50 years is, even now, is approaching, right, a lifetime, right? Meaning even now, fine. Even if the average age people are living is more in the 80s, but still, it's a good percentage of you. What?
But the average age of acquiring land is in the mid-20s now.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying, right? It's still true, right? Meaning, if you think about the number of years that people are working, right? People start working more or less in their 20s and they retire in their 60s. 50 years is still more than that. It's more than their entire economic activity, right? So that's a really long time, right? So it doesn't seem to be prophylactic in that sense. So then the question was, okay, well, in that sense, is Yovel, more capitalist, right? So Jabotinsky thought that fundamentally it was more capitalist in the sense that, as we just noted, within the 50 years of Yovel, people are buying, selling, do whatever they want. They can build whatever, right? There's nothing stopping you from, in the 50 years, leasing essentially as much property as you want for half a century, building tall apartment buildings and being a landlord, Rahman al-Islam, right? Nothing stops you, right? Nothing stops you from doing that, right? So then you have to sell it back after 50 years. But you know what? A 50-year lease is not bad, right? If you can be a landlord of 10,000 apartments for 50 years, you'll probably be pretty cash wealthy by the end. And remember, Yovel only applies to land, right? It doesn't even apply to chattel and to money, right? It applies to slaves also. They go free, fine. But besides for that, right, all the money that you made off this land, you get to keep. So he said, in that sense, he argued that the Torah was a little bit more capitalist in that sense than socialist, because socialism believes that you can drive people, you can motivate people to work without the drive to produce, right? Or produce in the way they want and achieve economic greatness in the way they understand it. And halacha, the Torah clearly doesn't go that way, because people have a lot of freedom in how they deal with those 50 years, right? And even beyond those 50 years. And therefore, he said, fundamentally, it is more capitalist. But Jabotinsky argued that it's not fully capitalist, because it has a corrective, right? It's corrective capitalism, meaning, unlike pure capitalism, which thinks that there's no problem whatsoever, right? Sort of theoretical capitalism. There's no problem whatsoever with equality, with inequality, right? It doesn't matter, right? You just let the market do what it wants, and even people who believe in equality of opportunity, right? Once opportunities are going, right? Equality of outcome, nobody really cares, and if that down the road opens up more doors for the rich and closes doors for the poor, well, too bad, right? At some level, you just got to let the market go. He argued that the Torah's unique vision is corrective capitalism, is that we do care about inequality. We do care about things getting out of control. We do care about people who are just hard on their luck and therefore just can't even get to the basic starting point where they can build an economic future. But the way we do that is not prophylactically like socialism, and it's not pure capitalism where we say, well, that's just too bad and my sympathies, right? But what it is that we allow the economy basically to function based on how human beings want it to, but we put in correctives, right? Shemitah, which says that, right, which is essentially, it's not bankruptcy, but it's the Torah's way of preventing bankruptcy, essentially, right, by wiping away loans every 7 years. And then Yovel, which is returning the basic, especially in agricultural society, the basic means of production, right, as it were, back to the people if things spiraled out of control, to give you a chance again, right? So it's corrective capitalism. And therefore he argued that this really was the vision. And then as we, explored in that series, this really captured the imagination of a lot of the early Zionists, and some of the laws we have at Hayom are modeled on this. Such as the fact that you don't buy land in Israel for the most part. 80% of land you only rent, right? You lease from Kakal, right, for 98 years, 99 years, something like that. At some point it was 98 years because it was twice Yovel, right? There was this remnant in the law. But Sean, when we had this year, said there's a problem because there's one thing that both Herzl and Jabotinsky are missing, and that is good, right? Is that both Jabotinsky and Herzl are not religious thinkers, and therefore they're just looking at the economic import of this, but they forget that the economic piece here is justified by Kili Haaretz, because I am God, right? They basically take that out of the picture and say, well, the economic insights might be true whether or not God is here. But as Sean very correctly pointed out, based on Professor Berman's piece in his book Created Equal, in the chapter God the Economist, right? Sean, what did you point out there? You're co-giving this year with me here. Yeah.
That Berman brings up that there's a recognition here, a divergence from original political thought at the time, which was that land was guaranteed through a governmental system, and that by divesting it from the government, then you create a realization, or the power that the government has over becomes null, right? There is no authority or power that is granted. Very
good. So one of the things that Sean correctly points out, that Professor Berman has noted, that if you compare the Torah's laws to the ancient Near East, you discover that many of the Torah's economic laws are trying to diverge politically from the vision in the ancient Near East. And a lot of the power that was invested in the government was down to land ownership. And therefore, the Torah is making a very important theological political statement by not doing that, by saying that the land inalienably belongs to the people, right? And it is a very weird system, right? Meaning, when you think about it, without the theology, it makes very little sense, which is God owns the land, and therefore you must keep your land. You cannot alienate yourself from the land because God owns it, right? It's a very bizarre system unless you think about it, unless you realize God is trying to say, yeah, I'm returning it to you because fundamentally what I want you to understand is the political control that people believe they have and the implications of politics in the ancient age are just not true. God owns it, and he gives it to you because he imbues you with dignity, right? But however, whatever twist on that you want to put in, you realize that it could be that this all works only with the theological background, right? Because it could be that the Torah's goal is not just to set up an economic system, but it's to set up a theological, political, economic system, in which case, if you remove the theological component, then this doesn't make sense, right? Because it's not just about giving people another chance. It's about people giving another people a chance to imbue them with a certain freedom and dignity, so that they'll recognize God. So that will create a certain framework in relationship with God. If that's the case, then even if the Torah has something unique to say about economics through the system of Yovel, it doesn't work in a secular world, right? Or it's just pointless in a secular world because it's not accomplishing its goal. So the question you have to then figure out is, do you think the Torah is both providing economic insights and theological insights, or are they tied together in the sense that the economic system is only meaningful from the Torah's perspective if it's couched in those theological terms and not secular ones, right? But that's really the question I think you got to think of, that Yovel clearly does, right? I think what's clear from Jabotinsky's analysis, and I do agree with him, is that the Torah, in a ideal Torah world, offers something unique to say about economics, which is hidden in Shemitah and Yovel. Unlike, right, Herzl. But the question that's left open is that unique vision only true in a fully theologically based political system, right? Or can you tease things out and say, look, there are certain insights that really make sense here, even if we're not in the ideal system, and therefore, if we want to be more Jewish in the way we express our lives, we should try to find ways of incorporating it, or do we say, no, that's not the point, right? The whole point of the Torah is that it's a holistic system that synthesizes politics and theology and economics and the like, and that's really an open question. You find this a lot amongst religious Zionists, right? Some who, we'll talk about this a little bit, I think, in Shirkoli today, right? But some who really think that you can do this piecemeal, right? And that the more Judaism you can sort of stick into the system, the better, and other people who just think it doesn't work unless it's holistic. And Rav Herzog, we're going to talk about today, and very much is of that latter school, and was very ambitious in the way that he tried to accomplish that. But at any rate, I think it's something that's worth thinking about, because obviously at some level, the Torah does have something to say about the big questions of life. We have to believe that, I think, right? But the question of how that manifests itself practically is a much more complicated question. Okay, well, thank you for co-teaching with me today, Sean. A pleasure. Good chazara. But I figured, the guys who weren't in that shir, it's one of those things that you have to be exposed to at some point in your life. That is literally when I read that piece by Jabotinsky, it opened my eyes. I'm like, wow, the early Zionist thinkers, even the non-religious ones, they really did care what the Torah said. They might have gotten it really wrong, like Herzl, right? Because Herzl, my God, got that one wrong. I mean, with all due respect. But on the other hand, Jabotinsky, I'm like, that's a very, very good read of Torah, even if, you may be wrong in removing the theological element and missing some important points. But it really opened my eyes to the importance of thinking about what the Torah has to say about the big questions in life, which again, and we'll talk about it a little more when we talk about Herzog, but for me, that's a very important point, right? The belief that the Torah has something to say about the big questions in life is important if you think that, God gave a system to guide the world, right? Then you would hope that God has something to say about economics and politics and the like. Okay.